The blade was inches from my throat when I realized I had made a terrible mistake, but that comes later in this story. Let me start from the beginning, from that November dawn in 1847 when everything I believed about faith, truth, and love would be shattered and rebuilt in ways I never imagined possible. My name is Garrett Thorne, and at 34 years old, I had grown comfortable with solitude. 3 years had passed since my dear wife Margaret succumbed to consumption, leaving me master of Thornfield Manor in the Yorkshire countryside with nothing but empty rooms and memories for company. I had convinced myself that peace lay in routine, in the predictable rhythm of estate management, and quiet evenings by the fire. How wrong I was. That morning, November mist clung to the estate grounds like fingers reluctant to let go of night. I had risen early, as was my habit, to walk the grounds before the servants stirred. The cold bit through my wool coat as I made my way toward the small stone chapel that had served the Thorne family for generations. Something about the approaching winter always drew me there, perhaps seeking comfort in the permanence of those ancient stones when everything else felt so fragile. But as I pushed open the heavy oak door, the familiar scent of old incense was tainted with something else. Something metallic and wrong. In the pale light filtering through stained glass windows, I saw her. A woman knelt before the altar, her back to me, wearing the distinctive black and white robes of a nun. But these weren't the pristine habits I'd seen in town. Her robes were torn, mud-stained, and dark patches that I realized with growing alarm were blood-stained the fabric near her shoulder. She hadn't heard me enter, so still was she in her desperate prayer. I should have announced myself, should have called out, but something in her posture spoke of such profound desperation that I found myself frozen. Her shoulders shook, whether from cold or emotion I couldn't tell, and her whispered words carried across the stone space like broken music. "Please," she murmured to the crucifix above the altar. "Let him understand. Let someone, anyone, see the truth." I cleared my throat softly, not wanting to startle her, but she spun around with such speed that she lost her balance, and would have fallen if I hadn't rushed forward to steady her. The moment my hands touched her arms, she cried out in pain, and I saw the extent of her injuries. Blood had seeped through her robes from what looked like claw marks across her shoulder, and her face bore the pallor of someone who had pushed herself far beyond endurance. But it was her eyes that stopped my heart. Deep brown and filled with such a mixture of terror and hope that I felt something inside my chest crack open after years of careful numbness. She was young, perhaps 26, with delicate features that spoke of gentleness even in her current state of distress. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't send me back to them. Not yet. I can explain everything, but please, just give me sanctuary until I can prove my innocence." The word sanctuary echoed strangely in that sacred space. By ancient law and Christian duty, anyone who sought sanctuary in a church could not be removed by force. But this was my private chapel, and she was clearly running from something, or someone. "What is your name?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle despite the turmoil in my mind. "Sister Lydia," she said, then hesitated. "Sister Lydia Ashworth of St. Brigid's Monastery, though I fear I may not hold that title much longer." The name stirred something in my memory, but I couldn't place it. "You're injured. Let me help you to the manor house. My housekeeper can tend to your wounds." She shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. If they find me, if anyone knows I'm here, it will bring trouble to your house. I should go, I should keep running, but I'm so tired, and the blood won't stop, and I thought perhaps in God's house I might find a moment's peace to think." Her words tumbled over each other in exhaustion and panic. Whatever had driven her to my chapel in the state of near collapse, it was serious indeed. I found myself making a decision that would change both our lives forever. "You'll stay," I said firmly. "At least until you've recovered enough to tell me what's happened. The storm that's been threatening all week is finally breaking, and no one should be out in weather like this." As if summoned by my words, thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat drops of rain began pattering against the stained glass windows. She looked toward the sound with something like despair. The storm will trap us both, she said quietly. And when they come looking for me, as they surely will, you'll be implicated in harboring a fugitive. What crime are you accused of? I asked directly, though part of me feared the answer. She met my eyes then, and I saw the pain there went deeper than her physical wounds. Theft, she said simply. They say I stole from the monastery's collection box, money meant for the poor. They say I betrayed my vows, my calling, and my sister's trust. They say I'm a disgrace to the habit I wear. The rain was falling in earnest now, drumming against the chapel roof like urgent fingers. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but found only exhaustion and a bone-deep sorrow that seemed genuine. And what do you say? I asked. For the first time since I'd found her, something like fire flickered in her dark eyes. I say I would die before I took a single penny from those who need it most. I say someone else committed this crime and is content to let me bear the blame. I say the truth exists, even if no one wants to hear it. The conviction in her voice convinced me more than any protestation of innocence could have. I had heard many lies in my 34 years, and this wasn't one of them. Then you'll stay until we can sort this out properly, I decided. My name is Garrett Thorne, and this is my family's estate. You have my protection, whatever that's worth. Her relief was so profound that tears spilled down her cheeks. You don't know what this means, she whispered. I've been running for 2 days, sleeping in barns and hedgerows, afraid to trust anyone because I don't know how far their influence reaches. Whose influence? I asked, but she was swaying on her feet, and I realized our conversation had pushed her past her limits. Never mind that now. Let's get you inside before you collapse entirely. I offered her my arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted it. As we made our way from the chapel toward the manor house through the strengthening rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. But when she whispered a soft thank you that was barely audible over the storm, I knew I had made the right choice. What I didn't know was that by morning, everything I thought I understood about truth, justice, and the power of accusations would be turned completely upside down. And the woman walking beside me, this mysterious Sister Lydia Ashworth, would teach me that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust your heart when the whole world is telling you not to. Mrs. Whitmore, my housekeeper, had served the Thorne family for over 20 years, and very little surprised her anymore. But when I appeared at the kitchen door in the early morning hours supporting a bloodied nun, her weathered face registered the kind of shock I'd rarely seen. "Good Lord, Master Thorne!" she exclaimed, immediately moving to help. "What's happened to the poor child?" "She's injured and needs our help," I said simply. "Can you prepare the blue guest room and fetch some hot water and clean bandages?" Mrs. Whitmore, bless her practical soul, asked no further questions. Within minutes she had Sister Lydia settled in the comfortable guest room that overlooked the manor's gardens, though the view was now obscured by sheets of rain against the diamond-paned windows. As Mrs. Whitmore tended to Lydia's wounds with the gentle efficiency of someone who had raised 4 children of her own, I found myself pacing the hallway outside like an expectant father. Through the partially open door, I could hear their quiet conversation. "These look like animal scratches," Mrs. Whitmore observed, her voice carefully neutral. "Deep ones, too. You're lucky they didn't go deeper, child. I was climbing over a stone wall in the dark," Lydia explained, her voice stronger now that she was warm and safe. "There was broken glass embedded in the top. I didn't see it until it was too late." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. Mrs. Whitmore, ever tactful, didn't press for details. "Well, you'll be right as rain in a few days," she said kindly. "Master Thorne's given you sanctuary, and that's good enough for me. You just rest now." When Mrs. Whitmore emerged from the room, she fixed me with a look I remembered from childhood, the one that said she knew I was up to something but wasn't sure if she approved. "She's a sweet thing," she said quietly, "but she's terrified of something fierce. Those aren't just physical wounds she's carrying." "What do you mean?" She startles at every sound, keeps looking toward the window like she expects someone to come through it. Whatever she's running from, it's got her scared down to her bones. I thanked Mrs. Whitmore and asked her to prepare some soup and bread for our guest. As she bustled away, muttering about mysterious nuns and stormy weather, I realized I was faced with a dilemma I hadn't anticipated. Having offered Lydia sanctuary, I now needed to decide what to do next. The storm raged all morning, making travel impossible even if I'd wanted to send word to the authorities. By noon, the rain had settled into a steady drumming that seemed to isolate the manor from the outside world entirely. It was then that Lydia appeared in the doorway of the library where I'd been trying unsuccessfully to concentrate on estate ledgers. She had changed from her torn habit into a simple brown dress that Mrs. Whitmore must have provided from Margaret's old wardrobe. The transformation was startling. Without the severe black and white of her nun's robes, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also somehow more herself. Her dark hair, no longer hidden beneath a veil, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and I found myself staring longer than was proper. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, stepping hesitantly into the room, "and to explain, as much as I can." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, noting how she chose to sit on its very edge, as if ready to flee at any moment. "Please tell me what's happened. Perhaps I can help." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was so soft I had to lean forward to hear her. "I entered St. Brigid's 3 years ago after my parents died in a coaching accident. I had nowhere else to go, no other family, and the sisters offered me a home. I thought I had found my calling in service to God and to those less fortunate than myself." I noticed she spoke of her calling in past tense, as if it was something already lost to her. "The monastery runs several charitable works," she continued. "We provide food for the poor, medicine for the sick, education for children whose families cannot afford schooling. I was particularly involved in managing the donations that funded these efforts." "That must have given you access to considerable sums of money," I observed carefully. Her head snapped up, and I saw a flash of something fierce in her dark eyes. "Yes, and I treated every penny as sacred. Those donations represented sacrifice from working families, money taken from their own tables to help others even less fortunate. I would never have taken so much as a farthing." The passion in her voice was unmistakable, and I found myself believing her completely. But belief and proof were different things entirely. "What exactly are you accused of?" I asked. £50 disappeared from the collection intended for winter provisions for the poorest families in the surrounding villages. The money was in a locked box in Mother Superior's office, and only 3 people had keys. Mother Superior herself, Sister Catherine who assists with the books, and myself. "And they believe you took it?" Her laugh was bitter. "They found £20 hidden in my cell, wrapped in cloth and concealed beneath my mattress. Money I had never seen before in my life." The pieces of the accusation were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they formed. Someone planted it there. That's what I believe, but who would trust the word of a novice over the evidence of their own eyes? The money was there, in my possession, and I had no explanation for how it came to be. "What about the other £30? "Never found. They say I must have already spent it or hidden it elsewhere." She stood abruptly and began pacing to the window, her agitation evident. "They gave me one night to confess and beg forgiveness. Instead, I ran. That was brave of you." She turned back to me with tears in her eyes. "It was cowardly. I should have stayed and fought to prove my innocence. But I was so frightened, and I knew that once I was formally accused and expelled from the order, no one would listen to anything I had to say. My word would be worth nothing against theirs." I studied her face as she spoke, looking for any sign of deception, but found only sincerity and a deep sadness that touched something in my chest I'd thought long dead. This woman, whatever else she might be, was not a thief. "You mentioned earlier that someone else committed this crime. Do you have suspicions about who?" She hesitated, and I saw fear flicker across her features. I shouldn't speculate without proof. It would be wrong to cast suspicion on others when I have no evidence. Even if those others were content to let you bear the blame for their actions. Especially then. Two wrongs don't make a right, as my mother used to say. Her adherence to principle, even in her current desperate circumstances, only strengthened my conviction of her innocence. But it also highlighted the seemingly impossible nature of her situation. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove you didn't do something when all evidence suggests you did? The storm continued to rage outside, and as afternoon faded toward evening, I realized we were truly trapped together until the weather cleared. But as I watched Lydia by the firelight, saw how she unconsciously touched the small wooden cross at her throat when she thought I wasn't looking, I found I didn't mind the enforced isolation as much as I should have. What I didn't know was that our peaceful interlude was about to be shattered. Because tomorrow would bring visitors to Thornfield Manor, visitors who would make it clear that the woman I was already beginning to care for more than I should was considered a dangerous fugitive. And I would be forced to choose between the growing warmth in my heart and the cold weight of seemingly undeniable evidence. The storm broke sometime during the night, leaving behind a crystalline morning that made everything seem washed clean and new. I woke with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation, as if the world held possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Over breakfast, Lydia seemed more at ease, some of the haunted look fading from her eyes as she shared tea and warm bread with Mrs. Whitmore and myself. "The gardens must be beautiful in spring," she observed, gazing out at the frost-covered grounds through the morning-room windows. "Margaret always said they were," I replied without thinking, then felt the familiar tightness in my chest at mentioning my late wife. But instead of the usual painful silence that followed any reference to Margaret, Lydia smiled gently. "She sounds like she was a woman who found joy in simple things. That's a gift." Her response surprised me. Most people either changed the subject quickly or offered awkward condolences. Lydia simply acknowledged Margaret's existence, as if it was natural and right that I should speak of her. "She was," I said, and found I could say more. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said the best people were those who stood up for what was right, even when it cost them dearly." "I hope I'm worthy of such praise," Lydia said softly. We were interrupted by Mrs. Whitmore's hurried entrance. Her face was flushed with exertion and concern. "Master Thorne," she said breathlessly, "there's a party of men approaching from the village road. Official-looking gentlemen, and they're moving with purpose." Through the window, I could see them now. 4 men on horseback, their dark clothing stark against the white frost. Even from a distance, there was something ominous about their determined approach. Lydia had gone completely still beside me, her face draining of all color. "They've found me," she whispered. "Go to your room," I said quickly. "Stay there until I know what they want." But even as she hurried from the room, I knew it was too late for pretense. The lead rider was already dismounting in my courtyard, and I recognized him now. Brother Augustine from St. Brigid's Monastery, a man I'd met several times at village functions. His stern face and rigid posture had always struck me as lacking in Christian charity, and today he looked positively thunderous. I opened the front door before he could knock, determined to control this encounter from the beginning. "Brother Augustine, this is unexpected. Mr. Thorne," he said without preamble, "we have reason to believe you may be harboring a fugitive from justice. A woman who has betrayed her sacred vows and stolen from the poor." "That's quite an accusation," I replied calmly. "Perhaps you'd better come inside and explain yourself properly." Brother Augustine was accompanied by 2 monastery officials I didn't recognize and, to my surprise, Thomas Caldwell, the local magistrate. Thomas had been a friend of sorts since childhood, though we'd grown apart after Margaret's death. His presence suggested this was more than just an internal monastery matter. In my study, Brother Augustine wasted no time with pleasantries. He was a tall, angular man in his 50s, with the kind of severe expression that suggested he found little joy in life and approved of even less. Sister Lydia Ashworth fled St. Brigid's 2 nights ago after being confronted with evidence of theft. He began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "We have tracked her movements to this area, and several people in the village reported seeing a woman in religious robes near your estate yesterday morning." "Even if that were true," I said carefully, "what makes you think I would know anything about it?" Thomas Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. "Garrett, if you're hiding her, you need to understand the seriousness of the situation. This isn't just about monastery discipline. Theft of this magnitude is a criminal matter. What evidence do you have that she's guilty?" I asked. Brother Augustine's smile was cold and satisfied. "The most damning evidence possible. The stolen money was found hidden in her personal belongings." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he placed on my desk with deliberate ceremony. £20, hidden beneath her mattress like a miser's hoard. Money that should have fed hungry children through the winter. I stared at the pouch, fighting to keep my expression neutral. £20 was indeed a significant sum, enough to keep a family comfortable for months. But something about the presentation bothered me. "This proves she had £20, I said slowly. "But you mentioned £50 was stolen. What about the remainder?" "Undoubtedly hidden or already spent on personal luxuries," Brother Augustine replied dismissively. "The important thing is that we have physical proof of her guilt." "May I examine this evidence?" Brother Augustine hesitated, clearly not expecting the request, but Thomas nodded. "That seems reasonable." I took the pouch and opened it carefully. The coins inside were mixed, some newer, some older, but all appeared to be standard currency. Nothing unusual about them individually, but something nagged at me about their collection. "Where exactly was this found?" I asked. "Wrapped in cloth and concealed beneath her mattress, as I said. Sister Catherine discovered it when we searched her cell." "And Sister Catherine can verify this?" "Of course," Brother Augustine said, but I noticed one of his companions shift slightly, as if uncomfortable. "I'd like to speak with her myself," I said. "That's not necessary," Brother Augustine replied quickly. "Her testimony has already been recorded. What we need now is for you to turn over the fugitive so she can face proper justice." The way he avoided my request to speak with Sister Catherine directly struck me as odd. In my experience, innocent people were eager to have their stories told and retold. Guilty people preferred to control the narrative. "Assuming I knew where this woman was," I said, "what assurance do I have that she would receive fair treatment?" "Fair treatment?" Brother Augustine's voice rose with indignation. "She has betrayed her vows, stolen from the poor, and fled rather than face the consequences of her actions. What more fairness does she deserve than the mercy of the church courts? The same fairness any accused person deserves. The right to defend herself, to present evidence, to face her accusers. She had that opportunity and chose to run instead." Thomas leaned forward. "Garrett, I understand your concern for due process, but the evidence is quite clear. If you're protecting her out of some misguided sense of chivalry, you're only making things worse for both of you." I looked at my old friend, noting how he avoided meeting my eyes directly. Thomas had always been a good man, but he was also a cautious one, unwilling to challenge authority without overwhelming proof. "What happens if she's found guilty?" I asked. "Expulsion from the order, of course," Brother Augustine said. "Possible imprisonment, depending on what the secular courts decide. The Church has no desire to be harsh, but theft is theft." "And if she's innocent?" Brother Augustine's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Innocent? Mr. Thorne, the evidence speaks for itself. £20 of stolen money hidden in her personal effects. What possible innocent explanation could there be?" That was the question, wasn't it? What innocent explanation could there be? As I sat there, surrounded by men who seemed so certain of Lydia's guilt, I found my own conviction beginning to waver. The evidence was damning, and these were respected members of the community. Surely they wouldn't pursue an innocent woman so relentlessly. But then I remembered Lydia's face when she spoke of her calling, the genuine pain in her voice when she talked about the money meant for the poor. I remembered how she touched that small wooden cross at her throat, and how she'd insisted on maintaining her principles even when it might have been easier to cast suspicion on others. "I'll need time to consider what you've told me," I said finally. Brother Augustine's face darkened. "Time? Mr. Thorne, we're not asking for your consideration. We're asking for your cooperation with legitimate authority. And you'll have it," I replied, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "After I've had time to think about everything you've said." As they prepared to leave, Thomas lingered behind. "Garrett," he said quietly, "don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. I know you've been alone since Margaret died, and I understand how a woman in distress might appeal to your protective instincts. But this isn't some romantic story where love conquers all. This is real life, with real consequences." His words stung because they contained enough truth to hurt. Was I letting my growing feelings for Lydia override my common sense? Was I so desperate for companionship that I'd convince myself of her innocence despite clear evidence to the contrary? After they left, I stood in my study staring at the leather pouch they'd left behind, my mind churning with doubt. The evidence was there, undeniable and concrete. But something about the whole situation felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. I'd told Lydia where you're watching from, and I realized I needed to hear her explanation for how £20 of stolen money came to be hidden in her personal belongings. Because until I understood that, I couldn't know whether I was sheltering an innocent woman or harboring a clever thief who had played upon my loneliness and sympathy to devastating effect. I found Lydia in the garden, despite the cold November air. She stood among the bare rose bushes, her borrowed shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring out at the frost-covered grounds as if trying to memorize every detail. When she heard my footsteps on the gravel path, she turned, and I saw in her face that she already knew what the visit had been about. "They showed you the money," she said quietly. "It wasn't a question. £20, hidden in your belongings according to Brother Augustine." She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd been dreading. "And now you're wondering if you've been sheltering a thief instead of an innocent woman." The directness of her statement caught me off guard. I'd expected denials, explanations, tears perhaps. Instead, she faced the accusation with a composure that was almost unsettling. "I'm wondering how £20 came to be in your possession if you didn't put it there," I said. "So am I." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been asking myself that question for 2 days now, and I still don't have an answer that makes sense." She began walking deeper into the garden, and I fell into step beside her. The frost crunched beneath our feet, and our breath formed small clouds in the cold air. The bare branches of the trees stretched overhead like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. "The night before I ran," she began, "I couldn't sleep. I'd been having strange dreams, nightmares really, about being accused of something terrible. So I got up and went to the chapel to pray. When I returned to my cell, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. My few possessions were in their usual places, my bed was undisturbed. The money was found beneath your mattress," I said. "Yes, but here's what troubles me. Every morning, Sister Catherine and I make the beds in the novice wing together. It's part of our daily routine. She would have felt the bulk of £20 in coins when she lifted my mattress. There's no way it could have been there for more than a few hours." This was a detail that Brother Augustine hadn't mentioned, and it struck me as significant. "Who had access to your cell that night?" "Anyone in the monastery, really. We don't lock our doors. Poverty, chastity, and obedience include trust in our sisters." Her laugh was bitter. Perhaps that was naive. We'd reached a small pond at the heart of the garden, its surface skimmed with ice. Lydia picked up a small stone and threw it, watching the ice crack and spider web patterns from the point of impact. "There's something else," she said, not looking at me. "Something I didn't tell you before because I wasn't sure what it meant." I waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would be crucial. 3 weeks ago, I discovered a discrepancy in our donation records. Small amounts, never more than a few shillings at a time, but they were missing from what should have been deposited in the collection box. When I brought it to Sister Catherine's attention, she said I must have made an error in my calculations. Did you believe her? I wanted to. Sister Catherine has been kind to me since I arrived. She helped me learn the routines, showed me how to manage the charitable accounts. But I double and triple checked my figures, and I was certain money was disappearing. The implications were becoming clearer, and I didn't like where they led. What did you do? I started keeping my own private record, noting every donation and tracking it carefully. I was planning to speak with Mother Superior about it, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before I made such a serious accusation. And what did your private records show? That over the past month, nearly £30 had gone missing in small increments. £30 that, combined with the 20 found in my cell, equals exactly the amount that was supposedly stolen from the collection box. The pieces were falling into place in a way that made my stomach clench with anger. Someone was stealing gradually, and when you got too close to discovering it, they framed you for a larger theft to discredit your investigation. That's what I believe, but I can't prove it. My private records were in my cell, and I didn't think to bring them when I ran. They're probably destroyed by now. I could see the despair in her eyes, the weight of fighting an accusation when all evidence had been carefully arranged against her. But I could also see something else, a flicker of hope that she was trying to suppress. There might be another way to prove your innocence, I said slowly, an idea forming. How? The money they showed me today. If it was stolen gradually over time, those coins should show signs of handling, of being passed from hand to hand over weeks or months. But if someone collected £20 specifically to plant in your cell, they might have had to gather those coins quickly, possibly from their own savings or from a single source. She turned to face me fully for the first time since we'd begun walking. You believe me? It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. Yes, I believe you. The woman I've come to know over these past 2 days couldn't steal from the poor any more than she could fly. Tears spilled down her cheeks then, and she didn't try to stop them. You don't know how much it means to hear someone say that. I began to wonder if I was going mad, if somehow I had taken the money and convinced myself I hadn't. I reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face, my thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. The gesture was more intimate than I'd intended, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly into my touch, and I felt something shift between us, something that had been building since I first found her in the chapel. Lydia, I said softly, I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever we discover, you're not alone in this anymore. Garrett, she whispered, and the way she said my name sent warmth through my chest that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. We stood there for a moment, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough that it would have been the most natural thing in the world to lean down and kiss her. The air between us seemed charged with possibility, with the recognition of something neither of us had expected to find. But then reality intruded in the form of Mrs. Whitmore's voice calling from the house. Master Thorne! Master Thorne, you're needed urgently. We broke apart, the spell broken, and hurried back toward the manor. Mrs. Whitmore met us at the kitchen door, her face pale with worry. It's Brother Augustine, she said breathlessly. He's returned with more men, and they're demanding to search the house. They say they have authority from the church courts, and if you don't cooperate, they'll bring the sheriff. Through the kitchen window, I could see them in the courtyard. Brother Augustine stood at the center of a group of 6 men, his face set with grim determination. They brought rope and what looked like shackles, making their intentions clear. They mean to take me by force, Lydia said, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. Not if I can help it, I replied, but even as I spoke, I wondered what I could realistically do against church authority backed by secular law. They had evidence, they had legal standing, and they had the power of numbers. But as I looked at Lydia, saw the woman who had maintained her principles even in the face of false accusations, who had worried about casting unfair suspicion on others even as she fled for her freedom, I knew I couldn't simply hand her over. Not without a fight. Not without exhausting every possibility of proving her innocence. The question was whether we would have time to find that proof before her accusers decided that my cooperation was no longer necessary. Because looking at Brother Augustine's face through the window, I could see a man who had moved beyond seeking justice into something that looked suspiciously like personal vendetta. And that made him far more dangerous than I'd initially realized. I met Brother Augustine at my front door with what I hoped was calm authority, though my heart was racing. Behind him stood 6 men, their faces set with the kind of righteous determination that could quickly turn violent if challenged. "Brother Augustine," I said evenly, "this is the second time today you've appeared uninvited on my property. Mr. Thorne, we have reason to believe the fugitive is here, and we have authority to search these premises." He produced a document with an official seal. "This warrant grants us the right to enter and recover stolen property and the person accused of theft." I examined the warrant carefully, buying time while my mind raced. The document appeared legitimate, bearing the seals of both the church courts and the local magistrate's office. But something about Brother Augustine's eagerness troubled me. "This warrant authorizes you to search for stolen property," I observed. "But you already recovered £20 yesterday. What additional stolen property are you seeking?" Brother Augustine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The remaining £30, naturally. The money that has not yet been recovered." "And you believe it's hidden on my property? Where else would a desperate fugitive hide her remaining stolen goods?" As we spoke, I noticed one of Brother Augustine's companions, a younger monk I didn't recognize, shifting uncomfortably and avoiding eye contact. Something about his demeanor struck me as significant. "Very well," I said, stepping aside. "You may search the public areas of the house. But I insist on being present for any search, and you'll treat my property with respect." Brother Augustine nodded curtly and gestured to his men. As they spread out through the ground floor, I caught sight of Mrs. Whitmore near the kitchen stairs. She gave me the slightest nod, and I realized she had helped Lydia find a better hiding place than her room. The search proceeded methodically, with the men examining every possible hiding spot in the library, drawing room, and dining areas. Brother Augustine himself seemed particularly interested in my desk, going through papers with an attention that seemed excessive for someone supposedly looking for stolen coins. "Find anything interesting?" I asked when he lingered over my personal correspondence. "One can never be too thorough," he replied without looking up. It was then that I noticed something crucial. The younger monk who had seemed nervous earlier was now examining the fireplace in the drawing room, and his hands were shaking. Not with cold or excitement, but with what looked like fear. "Brother Marcus," I called to him directly. "Have we met before?" The young man startled, dropping the fireplace poker he'd been moving aside. "No, sir. That is, I don't believe so." "Strange. You look familiar. Have you been to Thornfield Manor before?" "No, never," he said quickly, too quickly. Brother Augustine appeared at my elbow. "Brother Marcus assists with our charitable collections. He rarely leaves the monastery grounds." But I was watching Brother Marcus's face, and I saw something there that made everything click into place. Guilt. Not the general discomfort of participating in an unpleasant task, but the specific, sharp guilt of someone with intimate knowledge of wrongdoing. "Brother Marcus," I said gently, "how long have you been managing charitable collections?" That is." He looked desperately at Brother Augustine, who was glaring at him with undisguised warning. "Answer the question, brother," Brother Augustine said sharply. 6 months, Marcus whispered. "And in that time, have you noticed any discrepancies in the donation records?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Brother Marcus went completely white, and Brother Augustine stepped forward aggressively. "Mr. Thorne, these questions are irrelevant to our search. We're here to recover stolen property and apprehend a fugitive, not discuss administrative details." But I pressed on, sensing I was close to something important. "It's just that someone was stealing small amounts over time, and I wondered if you might have noticed the pattern." "Small amounts?" Brother Marcus repeated, his voice barely audible. "Yes, a few shillings here and there, never enough to be immediately obvious, but adding up to substantial sums over time. Brother Marcus looked like he might be sick. His eyes darted between Brother Augustine and myself, and I could see the war between conscience and fear playing out across his features. "Brother Marcus," I said as gently as I could, "did you take that money?" The young man broke entirely. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "I never meant for anyone else to be blamed," he choked out. "I never meant for Sister Lydia to suffer for my sins." Brother Augustine moved toward him with fury in his eyes, but I stepped between them. "Let him speak." "My sister," Brother Marcus continued, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "My sister and her children were starving. Her husband died in a mill accident, and she had nothing. I thought just a few coins, small amounts that wouldn't be missed, just enough to keep them from dying. So you took the money gradually, over weeks," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Yes, but then Sister Lydia started asking questions about the accounts. She was so careful, so thorough. I knew she would discover what I'd done eventually." "What did you do?" Brother Marcus looked at Brother Augustine with something approaching terror. "I told Brother Augustine about my fears. I thought perhaps he could transfer Sister Lydia to other duties, or maybe we could find another way to resolve the situation without her discovering my theft. The final piece fell into place with sickening clarity. But instead, Brother Augustine suggested framing her for a larger theft to discredit any accusations she might make. "That's enough," Brother Augustine snarled, but Brother Marcus was beyond stopping now. He said it would be easy. We would stage a larger theft and plant evidence that would make it look like Sister Lydia was the guilty party. Her novice status would make her word worthless against ours, and my smaller thefts would be overlooked in the scandal of her supposed crime. I felt rage building in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "So you planted £20 in her cell?" Brother Augustine provided the money from the monastery's reserve funds. He said once Sister Lydia was expelled and disgraced, we could quietly discover that she had actually taken less than originally thought, and return the £20 to the collection. No one would question the discrepancy once she was gone. Brother Augustine lunged forward then, his composure finally cracking completely. "You fool! You weak, sniveling fool! Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've told the truth," Brother Marcus said, straightening with what looked like relief despite his tears. "Something I should have done from the beginning." "The truth?" Brother Augustine's voice was venomous. "The truth is that this changes nothing. It's your word and his against mine, and I represent the authority of the Church. Who do you think people will believe?" But he was wrong, and I could see he knew it. Because at that moment, Lydia appeared in the doorway, flanked by Mrs. Whitmore and, to my surprise, Thomas Caldwell. My old friend looked grim but determined. "I've heard everything," Thomas said quietly. "And I have to say, Brother Augustine, your version of church authority doesn't much resemble Christian charity." Brother Augustine's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to rage to calculation and finally to something approaching panic. He was trapped, and he knew it. "Thomas," I said, "as magistrate, I believe you have sufficient evidence to arrest Brother Augustine for conspiracy and false accusation." "Indeed I do," Thomas replied, producing a set of shackles. "Brother Augustine, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of religious authority." As Thomas took Brother Augustine into custody, I turned to Lydia, who stood in the doorway looking as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd witnessed. "Is it over?" she asked softly. "It's over," I confirmed. "You're free, completely vindicated." But as I said the words, I realized they brought their own sadness. With her innocence proven and her name cleared, Lydia would be free to return to the monastery, to resume the calling that had been interrupted by false accusations. She would leave Thornfield Manor and me behind. As if reading my thoughts, she stepped closer. "Garrett, there's something I need to tell you. Something I realized while I was hiding upstairs, listening to the truth finally come out." "What's that?" I've spent the last 3 years believing that my calling was to serve God through the church, through vows of poverty and chastity and obedience. But these past few days, I've discovered something I didn't know was possible. She reached up and touched my face with gentle fingers, and I felt my heart skip. I've discovered that some callings come not through institutional service, but through love. Through choosing to build a life with someone who sees your true worth and fights for your innocence even when the world is arrayed against you. Lydia. I breathed, hardly daring to hope I understood her meaning. I was never meant to be a nun, Garrett. I was meant to find you, to love you, to build something beautiful and honest and true with you. If you'll have me. I answered by kissing her then, there in my drawing room with Mrs. Whitmore beaming and Thomas Caldwell clearing his throat diplomatically and Brother Marcus still weeping with relief. I kissed her with all the loneliness of the past 3 years and all the hope of the future we could build together. When we finally broke apart, she smiled at me with such radiance that it seemed to light up the entire room. So, she said, I suppose we should discuss the practical details of my leaving religious life and becoming Mrs. Thorne instead. Mrs. Thorne, I repeated, loving the sound of it. Yes, I think we should discuss that very thoroughly indeed. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, I married Lydia in the same chapel where I had first found her seeking sanctuary. Mrs. Whitmore wept through the entire ceremony, and even Thomas Caldwell was seen wiping his eyes during the exchange of vows. Brother Marcus, his conscience finally clear and his sister's family now supported through proper church channels, served as one of our witnesses. He had found peace in honest service, and his example helped reform the entire system of charitable collections at St. Brigid's. As for Brother Augustine, he spent 6 months in prison and was defrocked. Sometimes I wondered if he ever understood that his downfall came not from his crimes, but from his inability to recognize the power of truth and love over deception and manipulation. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. I was too busy discovering what it meant to wake up each morning next to a woman whose strength had been tested by false accusation and emerged even brighter. Lydia brought light and laughter back to Thornfield Manor, and joy back to my life. The lesson I learned that winter was one that changed not just my heart, but my entire understanding of what it means to trust another soul completely. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in grand gestures or heroic battles, but in the simple decision to believe in someone when the rest of the world has turned against them. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, that faith is rewarded not just with vindication, but with a love that transforms everything you thought you knew about what it means to truly come home. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of love conquering all odds, and I'll see you in the next one.